we've been talking about the article Genesis, Gilgamesh, etc., and some of the things that stood out to students. If you are taking this class at home, you need to let me know that you read that article before this class began, and it should be highlighted as well, the main points or those things that stand out to you. We're going to move on today to continue looking at the civilization of Sumer, and generally the Mesopotamian region, but specifically looking at Sumer. Today we're going to move on to the Sumerian religion. In the Sumerian religion, On, or Anu, was the chief deity. He's the head of the Sumerian gods. Inanna, there she is. Isn't she pretty? She's the goddess of love and fertility, prosperity, and she brought prosperity to Sumer through her marriage to the god Dumuzi. I don't have a picture. Mesopotamian mythology was a series of repeated stories that reenacted the unexplainable events that they saw, the things around them. You know, like many myths get started because people are trying to explain what they see in nature and how did that come about. Oh, by the way, I thought this was interesting when I found this a few years ago. The god of destruction in the Sumerian pantheon's name was Al-Ilah, or Allah. Isn't that interesting? The name Allah goes all the way back to the very first civilization, the god of destruction. It's not. It's not there. This is just extra interesting information that you are not required to remember. Except for, don't I have a place to put something about the gods? Like Anu, Inanna. Maybe after your article. Yeah, right there. On page 3. Page 3 of your notes at the very top. So I already have information there. You should fill in stuff about education there. And the two gods are listed, and so you should just put something about them. From what I told you. So On is the chief of the gods. Inanna is the goddess of love. The Mesopotamians had a view of the world that it was a flat disk. This is one of the few examples in history where people believe that the earth is flat. Flat disk, and that it was surrounded by a vast hollow space, and that was enclosed in an overarching heaven. And so that's the sky that's here. Now, if they talked about an underworld or netherworld, that would have been below. And then they believed there was sea all around them. They said the universe was born out of the sea. Somehow it came into existence from the sea. The Mesopotamians were polytheistic, meaning what? Many gods. And the Sumerians were clearly in touch with the spirit world. In matters of physical health, they relied on spiritual remedies. In other words, they thought that if they had a physical problem, it was caused by the spirit world. And they turned to exorcists. What's an exorcist? Anybody know what an exorcist is? Takes away what? Yeah, or demons. Someone who casts out demons. So they thought that their troubles were all of a spiritual nature, so they would hire exorcists to get rid of the demons that were possessing them. One of these demons is the wind demon Pazuzu. And he is the king of the evil demons. But his image was used to protect women in childbirth. I guess to protect her from other deities. The Mesopotamian pantheon included a number of prominent members. Here is a chart of the whole family tree. I wonder if would somebody like to volunteer to point out the different gods that I named them? Matthew, you want to do that? Okay, see if you can spot if you can help him if he has trouble. Okay, the first one that we want to find is Enki. I'm sorry, that's the word for universe, Enki. And that's the god On and the goddess Ki. You see On or Anu? Okay, up there at the very top. There's also an Anu down here. I'm not sure why there's two there. And then, let's see. And then Enki, I think there is the same as, no, it's not. Because Anu is married to Ki, that's a guy. So I don't see Ki on here. Let's see. The offspring of On and Ki was En-lil. And yeah, he's all the way down here. Okay, here's Anu and Ki here in the middle. And they have En-lil, Lord of the Air. En-lil is considered the most powerful god in the pantheon. En-lil and his powers are parallel to the Greek gods Zeus, which is the Roman god Jupiter. Okay, hundreds of other gods and goddesses were born, as you can see. Let's see, if we find Anu, the god of the sky, father of the gods, we have already. En-lil, the god of wind, the storm god. Do we have Utu? Okay, Utu is the sun god and one of the chief deities. And then Nin-Hersag, or Nin-Hersag, I should say. Nin-Hersag. That's Mother Earth, the source of life. We have Nin-Hersag or something similar. Does anybody see it? I don't see Nin-Hersag. Might be a different name on this one. Then we have Enki, the god of wisdom, who's Lord Earth. Okay, down there. Then we have Inanna, the goddess of love and war. Inanna. And notice that she's also Ishtar. Maybe you've heard of Ishtar. She's the goddess of the planet Venus, as the morning and evening star. Her name means Queen of Heaven. And she's the predecessor of the Akkadian Babylonian goddess Ishtar. Dumuzi. Do we ever find Dumuzi? Yeah, I see it. Dumuzi is a shepherd god and the husband of Inanna. You see Dumuzi? No. No, she's also called Tammuz. We'll keep that in mind for later. Then we have, let's see. Ninurta. 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 Anybody see that one? You see it? Okay. There's another name there also, god of the hunt, warrior. I also have down here is the god of the plow. Then we have Erishkigal. Erishkigal, queen of the greater earth, that is the underworld. And then we have Marduk, or Merodach. If I see Marduk or Merodach. All right, there it is. Yeah, another name there as well. He is called the young bull of the thunderstorms and is the actual city god of the city of Babylon. All right, now I just found this a little while before class, so that's why I wasn't familiar with all the names that are on here too. But it's a pretty interesting designation of all the different gods that they worshipped in Sumer. Now, another interesting feature of the Sumerian mythological world was the winged bulls. Maybe you'll see pictures of the winged bulls. You'll see it later in Babylon, called the Ur-Nammu. Now, you think about the gods, that controlled a lot of what they thought about the world. They valued fertility. They wanted to have good crops and have lots of animals born. They wanted protection in war. They respected wisdom. They had a reverence for the earth, and that's shown in the gods that they worship. According to Mesopotamian mythology, human beings were created so the gods would have servants. Now, in a sense, we could say, well, God created man to serve him, but not in the same way. When they say as servants, that meant the man should do things for the gods. Bring the food, all those kind of things. That's not what God has in mind for us. God has a loving relationship with us. So they missed that point. One Babylonian creation myth says it like this: man shall be charged with the service of the gods, that they might be at ease. So man's supposed to serve the gods so they can take it easy, so they can relax. That's not our God, is it? He's not relaxing because we're taking care of him. No. And so there's a contrast between their view of the gods and the Christian or Hebrew view of God. All right, so for these guys, they wanted to treat the gods right and the goddesses, because if they treated them right, then the gods would treat them right. They would give them whatever they needed. They would protect them, whatever it is that God did. Now, several times in a day, there would be an elaborate ritual where the god was served a sumptuous meal. God's dependent on the service of men, so people bring food. I thought you might be interested to know what kind of foods were brought to a god in one day. And in addition to that, they would play music and sprinkle incense. But here's the daily menu for the god En-lil in the city of Ur. He was brought 12 vessels of wine, 2 vessels of, don't write this down, unless you're just terribly obsessive compulsive and you want to write down everything. Look it up later if you want to. All right, just listen. 12 vessels of wine, 2 vessels of milk, 108 vessels of beer. Must have been a thirsty guy, huh? 243 loaves of bread, 29 bushels of dates, 21 rams, 2 bulls, 3 ostrich eggs, 3 duck eggs, 1 bullock, that would be an ox, 8 lambs, 60 birds, 3 cranes, 7 ducks, 4 wild boars, and a Big Mac. No, of course not. Just checking to see if you're paying attention. I'm not sure if you are. So what do you think about that list of food brought to that god every day? What do you think about that? Oh, that's a good question, huh? That's a lot of food, isn't it? What do you think happened to it?
It just laid in a pile.
And rotted?
Yeah.
And they brought in the next, oh, it's still there. Probably not, because they'd have to believe, the people would have to believe that the god actually consumed that food in order to bring more. John?
Maybe the priests and men.
That's probably what happened. When we get to it, I'll tell you a story about Daniel. It's not in the Bible, it's in another book that talks about how Daniel proved to Nebuchadnezzar that it was actually the priests that were taking the food away. It wasn't the god eating it. So we'll save that for that time. Probably the same thing is happening and has happened throughout history. So the people thought, man, this god really has a big appetite.
The priest would get some good food.
But the priest got some good food out of it, probably. The burial rites of Sumerians are also tied to their belief in the spirit world, and they followed a strict pattern. The body was wrapped in reed matting, occasionally placed in a coffin. The corpse was laid on its side with a bowl of water between the hands near the mouth, because he might get thirsty when he's dead. Some treasured belongings might go with him in the grave. Vessels filled with food and water were placed near the body so the spirit wouldn't be hungry and return for food, because they didn't want the spirits returning. Give them enough to keep them where they are. The tombs were furnished according to what the family could afford. So the royal tombs were filled with treasures. Now, one interesting thing about the Sumerians that we don't often think when we're looking at ancient civilizations, and that is that they apparently were descendants of Ham. And so these were predominantly black people. They even called themselves black. That was the name for themselves. When Semitic people, that is, descendants of Shem, which would be relatives of the Hebrews and so on, when they gained control of Sumer under Sargon, which we'll talk about in a minute, he said, "The black-headed peoples I ruled." Now, he wasn't talking about their hair color. He was talking about that their heads were actually black. So the Sumerians were descendants of Ham. All right, any questions about the life of the Sumerians, their education, religion, all those things that we have covered? All right, I just mentioned Sargon, and that's the next fellow, or I guess the first fellow we've talked about in quite a while. It's the first man who comes into this area and conquers much of the area around Sumer around 2300 BC. He's called Sargon of Akkad. And he is the one who starts the first empire. Now, how do we designate that? Well, up until this time, remember I said before that that the government was in city-states. So each city was like their own little country, city to city. Well, Sargon came in and conquered a bunch of city-states, and that's what made it an empire, because he's controlling a lot of different governments. Now they're all under him. So he's the first emperor of the first empire. All right, any questions about Sargon? There's his head in the statue, up all in here. All right, next we want to go to the civilization that comes following him, and that's called Ur-3. There have been two other civilizations in Ur before this, but they're not as important. We want to go to Ur-3, and this is the classical Sumerian civilization. In Ur, they had an absolute monarchy. What's a monarchy? Ruled by a king. Mon meaning one ruler, right? What's an absolute monarchy? What's absolute on there mean? What if I said he has absolute control? What would that mean? He's in total control, right? He's a dictator. All right, and that's what they had in Ur. I'm losing power on my tablet. I hope I can make it all the way through. The earliest law code we have. Oh, by the way, this monarchy was founded by Ur-Nammu, was his name, and he constructed a ziggurat of Ur in honor of the god Nana. And you can see Ur-Nammu here in this. He's on the front. And we have the earliest law code came from this civilization. The earliest law code. It's on this. Not much there, but you can tell. All right, next, the contributions of this civilization. They reached a high level of mathematics. They used square and cubic roots. You've used square roots, I'm sure, right? Have you used cubic roots too? What's a square root? What does that mean? Or what's something squared?
times itself.
Times itself, right. So square root would be, what's the number that is time itself? Okay, what's a number cubed? That's the number times itself 3 times, or 3 times. There's the number there 3 times. So a cube root would be that the original number that is multiplied times itself times itself. All right, so they developed that. They went by a lunar calendar, which means that the year only had 354 days, because the moon's, it starts at new moon, it goes to full moon, and then back to new moon. They studied astronomy, math, astrology, map making, and surgery. So pretty advanced. They did a lot of stuff. And they're the earliest recorded people to write, to actually write like sentences, things like that. All right, everybody got that? Okay. What their religion is very similar to what was before them. They just sometimes change the names. So we have Ishtar that was mentioned before, and Tammuz mentioned before. This is the names that they use for their main gods, Ishtar and Tammuz. Tammuz, or Ishtar, first of all, was a mother goddess, the goddess of love and fertility. Tammuz was the favorite son deity. He was the son of Ishtar. He was considered the god of spring, flowers, grain, and also the god of the hereafter, where he lived half of the year and then returned to the earth in the spring and brought the flowers in. Now, one interesting thing about Tammuz, one of the legends that developed, and some would say that this may have developed after the time of Christ, but the legend was that Tammuz died, and Ishtar brought him back to life. So that's why he goes into the underworld during the winter and comes back in the spring. But one thing that the followers of Tammuz did was to wear a necklace with a T. Necklace with a T. You ever seen any of those? It would look similar to what John has on here. So before there was a necklace with a cross, back in ancient times, people wore a necklace with a T. Oh, and Rick has one too. All right, so that may be where the original necklace came from. I don't know. I know that's not what you mean by it, but that's what they meant by it back then. The Amorites took over Ur in 2004 BC, and that's probably, the Amorites were probably the tribe to which Abram belonged. Now, I should have mentioned this before. The things that occurred in Ur-3 during this civilization we've just been talking about is the same time period as Genesis 12 through 50. So the last half of Genesis is the same time frame as this. That's why I say Abram may have belonged to the same group of Amorites that conquered Ur. One of the things we have from this civilization is called the Sumerian King List. This was written sometime early in the 2nd millennium BC. And this list delineates the history of Sumer by showing the succession of dynasties from the beginning of time to the present time of the writer. Each monarch in the early period rules for a very lengthy period of time. So, in other words, before the flood, they have them ruling for thousands of years. Now, that's an exaggeration, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility that it would have been hundreds of years, because that would have been consistent with what people lived before the flood, right? But then the king list abruptly and tersely mentions the flood. So they mention the Great Flood on here. And from then on, the time frame gets cut in half and gets less and less. The reigns of the monarchs begin to decrease from thousands to hundreds of years. And then we come to Gilgamesh, the famous hero who rules a mere 126 years. Now it's thought that he is from the town of Uruk, which in Genesis 10:10 is written as Erech. So very close, E-R-E-C-H instead of U-R-U-K. And then eventually the lengths of time falls within normal human lifetimes. So interesting, here's from ancient history an indication that it may not be exactly right, but an indication that before the flood, people lived a lot longer than they did after, which is exactly what the Bible says. Right? Next time, we will look at the world of the patriarchs, that is, those that followed Abraham, and see how that relates to the world around them as well. So for tomorrow, I want you to read pages 22 to 26 in your textbook and take notes as you read in the notes that I've given you in the outline. And then I want you to do the section review on page 26 in complete sentences. You know what a complete sentence is, right? Everybody knows that. Now, one little addition to a complete sentence, and that is, when I say a complete sentence, I mean you do not start your answer with a pronoun. So you don't start it with he. Instead, you start with whoever he is. Assume when you're writing a sentence, I don't know what the question is. I want to see in your answer basically the question, but I can tell what it is you're saying. So if the question is, during what century did George Washington live? You would not say he lived in the 18th century. You would say George Washington lived in the 18th century. Okay? Everybody understand? Okay, you've got a few minutes to get started on that assignment for tomorrow.